Have you ever stopped to wonder why some people seem to carry the entire world on their shoulders, while others simply move forward unaffected? Why, for some, every word spoken in a conversation echoes for days, while others forget it the very next minute. Maybe you're one of those people who feels everything so intensely that by the end of the day, the simple idea of existing already seems too exhausting. And maybe you've wondered if the problem is with you, if there's something wrong with not being able to simply switch off and live more lightly. But what if I told you that this deep exhaustion isn't a defect, but rather a coherent response to a world that wasn't built for those who feel with depth? There's a brutal difference between living and surviving. For most people, life flows on a comfortable surface where emotions come and go without leaving permanent marks. But for those who are genuinely sensitive, each interaction, each word, each look carries a weight that doesn't dissolve easily. It's not dramatic, it's not an exaggeration, it's simply the reality of processing the world in a more intense way than most can comprehend. While others turn off their minds at the end of the day and sleep peacefully, you continue replaying conversations, analyzing details, feeling the echo of emotions that weren't even yours to begin with. This intensity wasn't chosen. It's not something you can simply decide to stop doing. It's the genuine configuration of your perception, and carrying this alone, day after day, drains an energy that no one sees being spent. The problem isn't in feeling too much. The problem is in trying to function in a world that values those who feel little. You grow up hearing that you're too sensitive, that you need to toughen up, that you should stop taking everything so seriously, as if your way of existing were a factory defect that needed to be corrected. But the uncomfortable truth is that your sensitivity captures nuances that others completely ignore. You notice when someone is pretending to be okay. You feel the unspoken tension in a room. You catch the contradictions between what people say and what they actually feel. This heightened perception isn't a romantic superpower. It's an antenna that's constantly on and doesn't come with an off button. And while you process all of this, the world keeps demanding that you smile, produce, participate, and pretend that everything is perfectly normal. Recognizing this intensity as a legitimate characteristic, and not as a defect to be fixed, is the first step towards stopping the war against yourself. When you understand that your way of feeling is real and valid, even if rare, you begin to create protection strategies instead of denial strategies. You learn to consciously choose where to invest your emotional energy, knowing that your tank isn't infinite like others seem to be. You establish boundaries not out of selfishness, but out of survival necessity. And most importantly, you stop blaming yourself for not being able to be like the majority, because you finally understand that the majority simply doesn't process reality the same way you do. But this understanding doesn't erase the exhaustion of living in a world that never seemed made for you. There's a constant feeling of being out of sync, of always being a bit out of tune with the values that everyone around you seems to accept without questioning. While society celebrates speed, you need slowness to process. While everyone chases after more, you long for less, for silence, for depth, While the people around you get excited about superficial achievements, you wonder about the meaning of it all. This fundamental misalignment generates a type of existential exhaustion that goes far beyond the physical. It's the exhaustion of needing to constantly translate yourself into a language that isn't yours, of pretending you understand priorities that seem absurd, of adapting your frequency to fit into conversations that don't even come close to what really matters to you. I know it's hard to hear this, but maybe you'll never fit in completely, and maybe that's not the problem they made you believe it is. Maybe the problem lies in trying to force belonging where there was never real compatibility. You spend monumental energy trying to mold yourself to fit into groups, environments, and relationships that simply don't resonate with who you are. And deep down, you know this. You know you're pretending interest in conversations that don't feed you. You know you're laughing at jokes that don't seem funny to you. You know you're participating in social rituals that seem empty. But you continue, because the alternative seems to be absolute loneliness. Except that loneliness already exists, even surrounded by people. The loneliness of not being seen, of not being understood, of needing to simplify who you are to be palatable to others. Stopping trying to fit in and starting to seek the few spaces and people who truly share your frequency brings much more relief than continuing to force incompatible connections. Yes, these spaces are rare. Yes, these people are hard to find. But a single authentic bond nourishes infinitely more than dozens of superficial connections that drain your energy without giving anything in return. You don't need to be understood by everyone. You need to be understood by those who truly matter. And most importantly, you need to understand yourself enough to stop betraying yourself in the name of an acceptance that will never satisfy you. And then comes the overload of stimuli that the modern world dumps on you non-stop. Notifications popping up all the time, social media fed by an algorithm that knows exactly how to capture your attention, shallow conversations that lead nowhere, fragmented information that demands processing, but offers nothing substantial. For those who process everything with depth, each of these stimuli doesn't simply pass by, it accumulates. Each purposeless scroll, each sensationalist news story, each 15-second video designed to be addictive, piles up like emotional garbage that you can't ignore. While others slide through all of this unaffected, you feel your nervous system go on alert, desperately trying to filter what matters amid a sea of nothing. It's not being overly sensitive. It's the result of a neurological configuration that processes information differently. Your brain doesn't automatically discard the irrelevant like most people's brains do. Everything enters, everything is analyzed, everything is recorded in some way. And the current world throws thousands of stimuli at you per hour, expecting you to simply absorb it all and keep functioning normally. But you can't. There comes a point where the saturation is so much that you feel mentally exhausted just thinking about opening another social media app, reading another news article, consuming another empty content disguised as important. Mental exhaustion becomes chronic, and you start avoiding even things that used to give you pleasure, because you simply don't have the capacity to process anything anymore. Establishing rigid boundaries with information consumption stops being an aesthetic choice and becomes a matter of survival. Creating periods of digital silence, aggressively protecting your mental space, brutally filtering what deserves your attention and what doesn't. It's not about being radical. It's about recognizing that your system has a limit, and that exceeding that limit has real consequences. You need to protect your mind the same way you would protect your body from something harmful. And if that means disappearing from social media for days, ignoring trends, not responding to messages immediately, then so be it. Your mental health is worth infinitely more than your availability for others' entertainment. But even when you protect yourself from external stimuli, a loneliness remains that corrodes from within. The loneliness of not being understood, of living in a world where most people simply don't understand your way of feeling and perceiving reality. You try to explain, you try to share what you're feeling, and you see in others' eyes that expression of confusion, or worse, of pity. As if you were complicating something that should be simple. As if you just needed to change your perspective, think positive, focus on the good things. But you can't simply turn off your perception. You can't pretend you don't see what you see. You can't force yourself to feel less. And explaining this to someone who has never experienced it is like trying to describe colors to someone who has never seen. I understand perfectly when you feel exhausted from trying to make yourself understood. When you simplify what you're feeling to fit others' expectations. When you moderate your words to not seem too intense. When you swallow half of your truth because you know the other person won't be able to carry the weight of it. Each time you do this, a part of you gets silenced. And you accumulate all these silenced parts until the distance between who you are and who you can show becomes a painful abyss. You can be surrounded by people. You can have conversations all day. But the existential loneliness remains untouched because no one really sees you. This loneliness isn't the result of social inadequacy. It's the result of the rarity of finding someone who truly resonates with your depth. And accepting this rarity, instead of fighting against it, frees you from the impossible need to be understood by everyone. You begin to value quality over quantity in relationships. You prefer shared silence with someone who understands you over 1,000 words exchanged with someone who needs constant translation. And most importantly, you learn to keep yourself company, to validate your own experiences even when no one else validates them, to build a relationship with yourself that doesn't depend on external understanding to exist. And then there's empathy. That damn excessive empathy that no one asked you to have but that you carry like an inevitable burden. You don't just understand others' pain. You absorb it as if it were your own. You enter a room and immediately feel the tension, the discomfort, the sadness floating in the air. You talk to someone and leave carrying that person's emotions as if they'd been transferred to you. You watch the news and feel in your skin the suffering of people you'll never meet. This empathy isn't a romantic virtue. It's a real burden that drains energy in a way that those who don't feel it will never fully understand. You become the emotional container for everyone around you. People come to you to vent, to cry, to throw their anxieties. And you receive all of this because you can't simply close the door. You feel their pain so viscerally that refusing would be like denying help to someone drowning. Except no one notices that you're also drowning. No one notices that each deep conversation you have with someone leaves you emotionally destroyed for the rest of the day. No one recognizes that this emotional support function you constantly perform isn't compensated, isn't recognized, and doesn't come with reciprocity. You take care of everyone, but who takes care of you? If you're enjoying this content, maybe you'd also like our exclusive material that's in the first pinned comment. Learning to differentiate your emotions from others' emotions is a skill that no one teaches you, but that becomes essential for survival. You need to create conscious, energetic boundaries. You need to learn to say no. You need to understand that taking care of yourself isn't selfishness. When you finally establish these boundaries, some people will accuse you of having changed, of having become cold, of having lost your essence. But the truth is that you just stopped sacrificing yourself in the name of unlimited emotional availability. And if that bothers those who are used to using you as an unpaid therapist, the problem was never yours. But perhaps the most draining thing of all is the constant need to mask who you really are. You learn early on that your intensity bothers people, that your emotions are too much, that your depth is inappropriate for most social contexts. So you start pretending. You pretend to be okay when you're crumbling inside. You moderate your reactions to not seem dramatic. You simplify your thoughts to not seem complicated. You hide your sadness to not be the downer at the party. You disguise your excitement to not seem childish. Each social interaction becomes a carefully calculated performance of an edited version of who you are. This constant translation of yourself into something palatable to others consumes absurd energy. You leave a social gathering and feel like you've run a marathon, not because you interacted a lot, but because you had to maintain the mask the whole time. You had to monitor every word, every expression, every reaction to ensure you were within acceptable limits. And the more you do this, the more you disconnect from who you really are. A gigantic emotional debt accumulates between your authentic self and your performative self. And at some point, you don't even know anymore where the mask ends and where your true face begins. Allowing yourself to be authentic, even with the risk of not pleasing everyone, even knowing that some people will find you too intense, is an act of brutal but necessary courage. Seeking environments where the mask isn't necessary, where you can exist without needing to constantly edit yourself, restores energy that was being wasted on performance. Not everyone will accept you when you show yourself completely, but those who do will see you for real. And being truly seen, even if by few, nourishes infinitely more than being applauded for a false version of yourself. And then comes the disillusionment, with all those empty promises of happiness that society sells as a universal solution. Buy this, and you'll be happy. Achieve that, and you'll be complete. Think positive, and everything will work out. Be grateful, and life will improve. For those with deep awareness, these narratives simply don't stick. You see through the propaganda, you notice the fragility of motivational speeches, you feel the falseness of shallow solutions. And this lucidity, ironically, generates more exhaustion because it removes the anesthetics that work perfectly for the majority. The people around you can get excited about career goals, material achievements, success metrics that seem completely arbitrary to you. They can swallow toxic positivity without questioning. They can pretend everything is okay even when it obviously isn't. They can believe the promises that you just need to work hard and think positive to achieve happiness. But you can't. You see the emptiness behind these narratives. You notice how they're built to keep people functioning in a system that doesn't care about them. And without these comfortable illusions, you're left without support, without direction, without the tracks that guide everyone else. Building your own sense of fulfillment based on internal values, not external validations, offers a more solid foundation even if less glamorous. When you stop chasing what society says should make you happy and start investigating what genuinely resonates with you, things change. Maybe you discover you need much less than you thought. Maybe you realize your idea of success has nothing to do with money or status. Maybe you understand you're seeking connection, purpose, authenticity, things that can't be bought or displayed on social media. And building a life around these internal truths, even if it means disappointing others' expectations, brings a peace that no external achievement ever brought. But this search for meaning in a world that only offers distraction is exhausting. You look for authenticity and find filters. You seek depth and find superficial entertainment. You long for real conversations and find automated small talk. Each door you open hoping to find substance reveals only more superficiality, more noise, more nothing disguised as something. And the disillusions keep accumulating, weighing on your soul like constant reminders that maybe this world simply doesn't have what you're looking for. I'm not saying this to make you anxious, but to wake you up to a truth that maybe you already know but still resist accepting. The world, the way it's structured, wasn't made to nurture people who seek depth. It was made to keep people distracted, consuming, producing, without time or energy to question. And when you're someone who naturally questions, who seeks meaning, who can't simply accept the ready-made answers, you become incompatible with the default programming. This doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're trying to find water in a desert. Creating your own rituals of meaning, even if small and completely personal, nurtures this need for depth without depending on a world that doesn't offer it. It could be writing every morning. It could be walking alone, observing details that no one else notices. It could be reading books that speak to your soul. It could be cultivating a garden. It could be anything that connects you with something bigger than the automatic routine. These rituals won't appear on any productivity list. They won't bring you external recognition, but they'll keep alive an internal flame that the world constantly tries to extinguish. And in the midst of all this, you still carry an invisible emotional responsibility that no one recognizes but that constantly drains your energy. People come to you because they know you listen, that you understand, that you don't judge. You become everyone's walking confessional, the friendly shoulder, the unpaid counselor. And of course you want to help. Of course you care. But this unrecognized function exhausts you in a way no one notices because it happens backstage, away from the eyes of those who benefit from it. You spend hours listening to others' problems, welcoming pain that isn't yours, offering perspectives and emotional support that cost real energy. And when you need support, when you need someone to listen, these same people often aren't available. Not out of malice, but because they simply don't have the capacity to reciprocate at the same intensity. You become the emotional container for everyone around you while your own needs remain completely invisible. And the worst part is that when you finally admit you're exhausted, that you need reciprocity, people are shocked. As if you were breaking a tacit agreement of unlimited emotional availability. Establishing clear boundaries about your emotional availability and demanding reciprocity in relationships isn't selfishness. It's basic self-care. You have the right to choose where you invest your emotional energy. You have the right to say no when you don't have the capacity to carry anything more. You have the right to expect that the people you support will also support you when you need it. And if that bothers those who are used to using you as a free emotional resource without giving anything in return, maybe those people never truly cared about you. And then there's the awareness of injustices and collective suffering that you simply can't turn off. While others read news about violence, inequality, or tragedy, and go on with their lives normally, you carry that. You feel those people's pain. You feel outrage at the injustice. You feel the powerlessness of not being able to do anything significant to change it. Each normalized absurdity, each institutionalized injustice, each ignored suffering accumulates as moral weight that you carry alone while the world keeps spinning indifferently. Not being able to ignore the suffering around you makes existence infinitely heavier. You see the glaring inequality and don't understand how people simply accept it. You witness environmental destruction and feel real anguish while others make jokes. You notice structures of oppression functioning and can't simply pretend you don't see them. This heightened awareness doesn't make you better than anyone, but it puts you in a position of constant suffering because you pick up on a truth about the world that others anesthetize with distractions and denial. Channeling this awareness into concrete actions, even small ones within your real reach, transforms paralyzing powerlessness into limited but real agency. You're not going to save the world alone. You're not going to solve inequality. You're not going to end injustice. You're not going to fix everything that's broken. But you can do something. You can help one person. You can contribute to a cause. You can use your voice where it reaches. You can make daily choices that align with your values. It's not about grandeur. It's about integrity. About not paralyzing yourself completely in powerlessness, but also not pretending everything is fine. And relationships, my God, the superficial relationships that drain without nourishing. Empty small talk about the weather. Automatic conversations about work. Purposeless gossip. Interactions that follow a social script but have no soul. For those who need depth to feel alive, each of these conversations is more isolating than being alone. Because you're investing energy in something that doesn't give you anything back. You're pretending interest in subjects that don't matter. You're participating in a social dance that seems absurd. It's not a perfectionist demand to want real conversations. It's not being difficult to need authentic bonds. It's a genuine necessity that's rarely met because most people are comfortable on the surface. They don't need more, they don't seek more. They're satisfied with disposable connections that don't require vulnerability. But you can't function like that. An empty conversation leaves you more isolated than before because it highlights the distance between what you need and what's available. And continuing to invest in these bonds that don't nourish is wasting energy that's already in short supply. Rigorously selecting who you invest time and energy in, prioritizing few deep bonds over many superficial ones, preserves your relational vitality. Quality over quantity isn't a cliché, it's a survival strategy. Better to have 2 friends who truly see you than 20 acquaintances who only know you by the surface. Better to be alone than surrounded by people who make you feel alone. Better to invest deeply in those who reciprocate than to scatter crumbs of yourself to a crowd that doesn't even notice your absence. And the feeling of not finding your place in the world, of always being on the margins, without fitting into groups, tribes, or conventional social structures. You try to participate, you try to insert yourself, but there's always a piece of you that doesn't fit. It's not pathological maladaptation, it's legitimate incompatibility. The existing spaces simply weren't made for your frequency. The groups follow dynamics that don't make sense to you. They value things that seem irrelevant. They operate on a logic you can't internalize even when trying. Each attempt to fit in fails not because of your failure, but because you're trying to put an irregular shape into a square box. And you can cut yourself, bend yourself, squeeze yourself, but there will still be pieces left over or parts missing. This non-belonging creates constant existential fatigue because you never have a psychological home. You never have that place where you can simply be without effort, without translation, without performance. You're always explaining who you are, always justifying your choices, always being the different one, the complicated one, the one who doesn't fit. Creating your own microspaces of belonging, even if solitary or tiny, offers more dignity than forcing inclusion where you don't fit. Maybe your space is your room with your books. Maybe it's an online community of people who share your niche interests. Maybe it's the company of a single friend who understands you. Maybe it's simply the relationship with yourself, built with so much care that you become your own home. It doesn't need to be grand, it needs to be true. It needs to be a place where you don't have to pretend, where your strangeness is accepted, where your intensity is welcome. And you also experience intense internal storms that rarely find safe space to be shared without judgment or minimization. Inside, you process layers and layers of thoughts, emotions, reflections, questions. There's a universe happening in your head and chest that is rich, complex, deep. But when you try to share even a fraction of it, people either don't understand or minimize, or try to quickly fix it with shallow solutions. So you learn to keep everything inside. Keeping everything inside creates unsustainable pressure that consumes from within. You carry alone an inner world that no one sees or validates. You accumulate layers of unprocessed experiences that ferment in silence, creating an emotional density that gets heavier and heavier. And since no one sees it, no one knows the weight you carry. To the world, you're fine. Maybe even admirable for your strength. But inside, you're imploding under the weight of everything you can't express. Finding forms of expression that don't depend on others' understanding becomes necessary. Writing without intention to publish, just to get it out. Creating art that no one needs to understand. Doing deep therapy with someone who can truly handle your intensity. Having that rare friend who can listen without trying to fix. These escape valves aren't luxury, they're necessity to avoid implosion. Because processing internally without ever expressing externally is like breathing only inward without ever releasing the air. And you also carry the weight of anticipating consequences that others completely ignore. You see patterns, connect dots, notice where certain actions will lead. While others live in immediacy, focused only on the now, you see the future unfolding with disturbing clarity. You see the emotional consequence of a decision that seems harmless. You see the social impact of a trend that's just beginning. You see the environmental catastrophe approaching while everyone ignores the signs. This anticipatory vision is lonely and draining because you carry the urgency alone. You try to warn and are called a pessimist, anxious, catastrophist. People prefer comfortable denial to uncomfortable preparation. So you stay there, watching the future approach exactly as you predicted, carrying alone the weight of an awareness you can't turn off. The anxiety this generates isn't pathological. It's the logical consequence of seeing beyond while being stuck in a present that refuses to look ahead. Documenting your perceptions without necessarily convincing others, and preparing yourself internally for futures you anticipate, reduces the anxiety of trying to alert those who don't want to listen. You don't need to make everyone see what you see. You can simply recognize your vision, trust it, and make decisions based on it. Prepare yourself emotionally, practically, philosophically for what you know is coming. And when it comes, you'll be less destroyed because you had already processed the possibility. And then there's the disillusionment with systems that promise care but deliver control. You seek genuine help and find protocols that want to fit you into diagnoses. You look for deep therapy and find professionals who offer superficial symptom management solutions. You try to open up about your sensitivity and hear that maybe you need medication to feel less. As if your way of existing were pathology to be corrected, not a characteristic to be understood. This distrust isn't rebellion, it's protection against more disillusions. You've already tried trusting systems that promised to understand you and left feeling even more misunderstood. You've already followed protocols that were supposed to help but only made you feel more wrong. You've already believed in approaches that promised cure but only wanted to silence your legitimate questions. And each of these experiences left a scar that taught you to be more cautious about where you place your trust. Seeking alternative self-care approaches. Horizontal communities where people support each other without medical hierarchy. Self-knowledge about your sensitivity through research and self-exploration offers more autonomy than systems that don't understand your nature. You become your own specialist. You learn to interpret your signals. You discover what works for you specifically. Not because all professionals are bad, but because you know your internal experience in a way that no one else can know. And your body also feels too much. It's not just emotional, it's physical too. Sounds that others don't even notice assault you. Fluorescent lights drain your energy. Clothing textures bother your skin all day. Noisy environments leave you exhausted. Strong smells make you nauseous. Your nervous system is constantly on alert, processing sensory information that others automatically filter out. Each stimulus that should be ignored by your brain is registered, processed, felt. A noisy environment isn't just uncomfortable, it's aggressive to your system. A bright light isn't just irritating, it's painful. A piece of clothing with the wrong texture isn't being picky, it ruins your entire day because you feel it on your skin every second. And no one validates these experiences because for most people these stimuli simply don't exist on their radar. So you're seen as too sensitive, as if you were making up problems, as if you just needed to ignore it. Adapting your physical environment to your real sensory needs without guilt or shame is legitimate self-care. Using noise-canceling headphones isn't antisocial, it's necessary protection. Choosing clothes by texture and not by fashion isn't frivolity, it's basic comfort. Avoiding overly stimulating places isn't limitation, it's respect for your real limits. And communicating these needs clearly, without excessive justification, teaches people that your sensory sensitivity is as real as any other physical need. And you also carry questions that no one wants to answer. Questions about meaning, about death, about purpose, about existence. Questions that bother because they don't have easy answers, that push people away because they expose the fragility of their comfortable certainties. You don't ask these questions to be dramatic or pretentiously philosophical. You ask because you genuinely need to understand, because these questions pulse in you demanding attention, because you can't simply accept ready-made answers and move on. But most people prefer ready-made answers and avoid existential discomfort. They prefer to believe what they were taught without questioning much. They prefer distraction to deep reflection. So when you bring your genuine questions, they're treated as unnecessary drama, as a sign of depression, as if you were looking for problems. No one honors your questions. No one sits with you in the mystery. No one explores the uncertainty by your side. And you're left alone with enormous questions that don't fit inside you but find no space outside. Finding philosophical interlocutors who honor your questions without trying to silence them nurtures an essential dimension of who you are. It could be books by philosophers who asked the same questions centuries ago. It could be discussion groups where people meet precisely to explore these questions. It could be that rare friend who is also tormented by the big questions. It doesn't need to have answers, it needs to have company in the search. It needs to feel that your questions matter, that they're valid, that you're not crazy for not being able to simply accept and move on. And after all of this, after feeling too much, processing too much, carrying too much, comes inevitable exhaustion. The deep tiredness of existing this way in a world that wasn't made for you. And perhaps the most important thing you can understand is that this exhaustion isn't your failure. It's not weakness. It's not a defect. It's not a sign that you need to fix yourself. It's a coherent, sane response to an environment that is genuinely toxic for your configuration. Recognizing this exhaustion not as pathology, but as a legitimate reaction to an incompatible world is profoundly liberating. You stop blaming yourself for not functioning well in a system that was never made for you. You stop thinking the problem is with you, when in reality the problem is the incompatibility between your nature and this world's demands. Your sensitivity captures a truth about reality that others anesthetize with distraction, denial, superficiality. And carrying this truth has a cost. Validating this exhaustion without trying to fix it immediately allows dignity in suffering. You can be tired, and that can be completely valid. You might need more rest, more silence, more slowness than others, and that doesn't make you inferior. You might feel the weight of existence more intensely, and that doesn't mean you're broken. Sometimes, recognizing and honoring the exhaustion is more important than trying to force energy that doesn't exist. It's completely valid to feel all of this. Valid to recognize that you're exhausted. Valid to admit that living this way is difficult. Valid to want rest, to want less, to want silence. You don't need to always be okay. You don't always need to overcome. You don't need to transform your suffering into a motivational lesson. You can simply be tired and allow that to be true without immediately trying to solve it. And in the midst of all this exhaustion, understanding yourself deeply becomes the first act of compassion toward yourself. Understanding why you feel what you feel. Why certain things affect you in ways they don't affect others. Why you need what you need even if it seems excessive to most. This understanding doesn't solve everything, but it opens the path to existing with more awareness and less guilt, to making choices that honor your nature instead of constantly betraying it, trying to be who you're not. The problem was never you. It was trying to exist authentically in a world that values performance. It was trying to maintain depth in a society that celebrates superficiality. It was trying to feel fully when everyone around you is anesthetized. Your sensitivity isn't a defect to be corrected. It's a characteristic to be understood, protected, honored. If you made it this far and all of this resonated deeply, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. This type of content exists precisely for people like you, who seek depth in a sea of superficiality. And knowing that these reflections reach those who truly need them makes it all worthwhile.